Welcome to Agro TV, the place where we uncover the legends, the disasters, and everything in between in the world of farming machines. Today, we're not talking about tractors that made history for the right reasons. We're talking about the ones that left a scar on their brand's reputation. In this video, we're counting down the 13 worst tractor models that hurt the brand and nobody wants back. These aren't just machines that broke down now and then, they're tractors that failed so badly, they left farmers angry, mechanics busy, and manufacturers embarrassed. Whether it was poor engineering, awful transmission setups, unbearable operator comfort, or designs that just didn't make sense. Each of these models became a stain on the legacy of otherwise respected companies. From the overhyped to the underbuilt, from the underpowered to the overpriced. These tractors sparked frustration, regret, and sometimes outright rage. If you've ever owned a machine that looked good in the brochure but turned into a nightmare in the field, chances are it's somewhere on this list. Get ready, because what you're about to see is a full-blown parade of mechanical disappointment. Let's dive into the 13 biggest letdowns in tractor history right now on Agro TV. Number 13. The International 1086 might carry a legacy badge, but let's not kid ourselves, this tractor has more flaws than fans like to admit. For starters, that clunky cab design feels like it was slapped together as an afterthought, with poor visibility, a noisy interior and controls awkwardly placed in ways that make long hours in the seat a literal pain. The notorious TA torque amplifier system is another Achilles heel prone to failure and expensive to repair. It's a mechanical gamble every time you shift. While the DT436 engine delivered decent horsepower on paper around 130 horsepower, it came with overheating issues, fuel system quirks, and a reputation for being tough to start in cold weather. The transmission, with its gear, range split setup, can be a clumsy affair that left many operators frustrated and constantly double-checking their shift points. And let's not ignore the fact that while the 1086 was supposed to compete with Deere and other rivals of its era, it often fell short in refinement, comfort, and long-term reliability. Even the rear hitch and hydraulics, while serviceable, lacked the finesse and response competitors offered. Sure, it had brute strength, but so does a brick. There's more to a good tractor than raw muscle. In hindsight, the 1086 feels more like a rushed attempt to stay in the game than a truly polished machine. And while nostalgia might blind some, the flaws are still loud and clear. Number 12. The Case IH 5140 may wear the Magnum family badge proudly, but underneath that red paint lies a laundry list of compromises that make it hard to overlook its flaws. For a tractor that was supposed to be a mid-range workhorse, the 5140 ends up being a jack of some trades and a master of none. The cab, while improved from older models, still suffers from limited visibility, especially rearward, and feels cramped compared to its Deere and New Holland rivals of the same era. The electronically controlled transmission, which was marketed as a step forward, often turns into a frustrating guessing game, with rough, shifting, lag between ranges, and finicky controls that leave operators second-guessing every move. While the CDC 5.9-liter turbocharged engine does deliver around 112 horsepower, it's nothing groundbreaking, and many owners report issues with fuel delivery, cold starts, and inconsistent power under load, especially when pushing implements to their limits. Hydraulic capacity is another letdown, often underwhelming for tasks like loader work or modern hay equipment, and the 3-point hitch response is sluggish at best. Build quality also shows its age, with electrical gremlins, plastic interior, panels that rattle and crack, and a dash cluster that tends to quit when you need it most. For a machine that was meant to bridge the gap between utility and premium, the 5140 feels like it got caught in the middle, neither refined nor rugged enough to stand out. It's a reminder that not every Case IH badge guarantees brilliance. Number 11. The Ford 6000 is one of those tractors that sounds impressive on paper but quickly unravels in real-world use, earning its reputation as one of Ford's most regrettable experiments. Released with great fanfare in the early 1960s, it was supposed to be a revolutionary machine, but instead, it stumbled out of the gate with a cascade of mechanical problems. The original Selecto-Speed transmission, meant to be a selling point, became its most notorious flaw: reliable, overly complex, and prone to catastrophic failure. It frustrated farmers to no end, and often required major repairs far too soon. Even after Ford issued a recall and updated the transmission, the damage was already doneward, spread fast, and confidence in the model was permanently shaken. The 6-cylinder diesel engine may have sounded like a powerhouse, but it was inefficient and had frequent injector and cooling system issues. The tractor's tall, narrow design made it feel unstable on uneven terrain, and the ergonomics were almost laughably bad. Awkward step placement, a noisy operator station, and confusing control layout turned daily operation into a chore. Hydraulics were underpowered and slow to respond, and the PTO engagement was anything but smooth. Despite Ford's attempts to fix the early disasters, the 6000 never quite recovered and became more of a cautionary tale than a cornerstone of their lineup. In hindsight, it felt more like Ford was rushing to catch up to the competition rather than setting a new standard. And what we got was a bulky, glitch-prone machine that simply didn't live up to the hype. The Ford 6000 serves as a glaring reminder that bold innovation without proper execution can leave you with little more than a painful legacy. Number 10. The Yanmar TC11 might look like a quaint and compact utility tractor, but behind its small frame lies a long list of frustrating shortcomings that make it more of a novelty than a reliable workhorse. With a minuscule 11 horsepower diesel engine, it barely musters enough grunt to handle anything beyond the most featherweight tasks, leaving operators constantly pushing the machine to its limits and paying for it in strain and wear. Under load, the engine feels bogged down and labored, and any attempt to run heavier implements quickly reveals the TC11's lack of torque and poor power-to-weight ratio. The transmission is equally unimpressive, offering clunky and gear changes that feel more like guesswork than smooth control, and with no live PTO, engaging attachments can be jerky and unpredictable, especially under strain. Stability is another glaring issue, thanks to its narrow stance and light build, which make the TC11 prone to tipping or bouncing over rough terrain. Comfort and ergonomics were clearly an afterthought. The seat is stiff and unsupportive, the controls are awkwardly positioned, and there's minimal vibration dampening, meaning long hours in the saddle can feel exhausting. The hydraulics are underpowered, sluggish, and limited in lift capacity, which severely hampers the utility of the three-point hitch. Add to that an outdated electrical system, lack of lighting, and almost no weather protection or operator features. And the TC11 feels more like a stripped-down lawn toy than a serious piece of equipment. While it might appeal to collectors or hobbyists looking for a simple machine for flat light-duty work, the TC11 simply doesn't cut it when it comes to real-world performance or practicality. Number 9. The John Deere 8630 may have been marketed as a powerhouse of its time, but in practice, it turned out to be one of the company's most problematic four-wheel drive tractors. Equipped with a turbocharged 6-cylinder engine producing around 275 horsepower, it promised serious muscle, but that promise was undercut by chronic engine reliability issues, especially in early models. The 531 cubic inch power plant was pushed beyond its design limits, leading to overheating, head gasket failures, and cracked blocks that left many owners staring at expensive rebuilds far too soon. The full-time articulated four-wheel drive system gave it decent pulling ability, but the articulation joint and driveline components were notoriously high maintenance, with U-joints and seals prone to early wear. The transmission was clunky and lacked the refinement found in competitors' machines, forcing operators to wrestle through gear changes rather than glide. Inside, the cab was loud, poorly insulated, and ergonomically outdated by late 70s standards, with minimal creature comforts and an awkward layout that made long days a real grind. Visibility to the rear was poor, the dash cluster was prone to electrical glitches, and parts availability has only gotten worse with age, making ownership today more of a restoration headache than a practical investment. While it had brute force and size, the 8630 lacked the balance, reliability, and long-term durability that farmers expect from a tractor wearing the John Deere badge. In hindsight, it feels more like a rushed response to the high-horsepower market than a well-rounded, battle-tested machine. And its legacy is more a cautionary tale of pushing limits than a triumph of innovation. Number 8. The Massey Ferguson 97 might look like a rugged brute on the outside, but dig a little deeper and you'll find a tractor riddled with compromises and quirks that make it far less appealing than its imposing stance suggests. Based on the Minneapolis Mullen G705 and equipped with a massive 6-cylinder diesel engine producing around 120 to 130 horsepower, the 97 was built for power, but that power came at the cost of refinement, reliability, and operator comfort. The engine, while torquey, was notoriously loud, rough, and hard to start in colder conditions, often requiring a long warm-up and a steady hand on the throttle just to keep it running smoothly. The transmission was another sore point, offering a limited number of forward speeds and a clunky, stiff shifting experience that left operators fighting the controls more than they should have. The steering was heavy and unresponsive, especially at low speeds, and the brakes were notoriously weak, making maneuvering this beast a chore rather than a pleasure. Inside the cab, or more accurately, on the open operator platform, you were exposed to the elements, rattled by vibrations, and deafened by engine noise, all while dealing with a sparse and uncomfortable control layout. Hydraulics were serviceable, but slow, and the three-point hitch lacked the responsiveness and precision found in other tractors of its era. Even basic maintenance was a hassle, with poor access to filters and components that made routine service more difficult than it needed to be. While the MF97 might look like a heavy-duty solution for serious field work, its real-world usability is marred by dated design, operator fatigue, and mechanical headaches. For a tractor that's supposed to embody brute strength, it ends up being a cumbersome and frustrating machine to live with. Number 7. The DeutzEl 9170 was introduced with bold intentions, aiming to bring European engineering and American muscle together. But what came out was a confusing blend of mismatched design choices and chronic reliability issues that made ownership more of a burden than a benefit. Powered by a massive Deutz D15 air-cooled diesel engine, producing around 290 horsepower. The 9170 sounded impressive, but in practice, the engine was a divisive choice. The air-cooled design, while unique, was ill-suited for North American farming conditions, prone to overheating in hot, dusty environments, and incredibly expensive to maintain due to limited parts availability and the need for precise maintenance intervals. Many operators found the engine noisy, temperamental, and unnecessarily complex, especially when compared to the simpler, liquid-cooled alternatives offered by competitors. The transmission, a power shift setup, suffered from inconsistent performance, jerky shifting under load, and a reputation for being both finicky and expensive to repair. The cab, while spacious on paper, had awkward ergonomics, limited visibility from the high hood profile, and dated interior features that fell behind other premium tractors of its time. Electronics were another weak link, with unreliable sensors, and wiring issues that caused random faults and poor diagnostic clarity. The articulation joint wore prematurely, hydraulic couplers were finicky, and the tractor's sheer size made it impractical for anything but the largest, most open fields. Despite its bold specs, the 9170 never quite lived up to its promise and became more known for its frustrations than its field performance. It stands as a reminder that bold engineering doesn't always equal better results. Sometimes it just equals a very expensive learning experience. Number 6. The Farmal F20 might hold a nostalgic place in the early history of row crop tractors, but looking at it through a modern or even mid-century lens, it's hard to ignore just how crude and limiting this machine truly was. Introduced in the mid-1930s, the F20 was essentially a mechanical relic even by the time World War II ended, saddled with a 2-plow rating and an underpowered 4-cylinder engine that delivered around 29 horsepower on a good day, hardly enough for demanding fuel. Starting the engine was a chore in itself, relying on a hand crank that could kick back violently if not handled perfectly, making every cold start a literal risk to the operator's wrist or arm. Its lack of a true electrical system in earlier models, combined with rudimentary magneto-ignition and basic oil bath air filters, made maintenance frequent and frustrating. The steel wheels found on early versions were brutal on both fields and the operator, and even when rubber tires became more common, ride comfort remained nearly non-existent thanks to a rigid frame and no real suspension. The rear-mounted operator platform was exposed, cramped, and devoid of even the most basic ergonomic considerations, turning long workdays into a battle against fatigue and vibration. The narrow front end, though designed for row crop agility, made the tractor unstable on uneven ground, and there was no live PTO or hydraulics to speak of, severely limiting its versatility in an era when competitors were beginning to innovate. Despite its historical role, the F20 quickly became outdated and obsolete, and by modern standards, it's more a symbol of what tractors used to lack rather than what they offered. It may have helped shape early mechanized farming, but it also stands as a clear example of how far the industry had to go. Number 5. The Massey Ferguson 1150 was intended to be a high-horsepower game-changer in the late 1960s, but in reality, it ended up exposing the cracks in Massey's engineering under pressure. Equipped with a massive Perkins V8 diesel engine pushing out roughly 145 horsepower, the 1150 delivered on brute force, but stumbled hard in execution. That V8 might have sounded impressive, but it was thirsty, ran hot, and developed a reputation for oil leaks, blown head gaskets, and an overall lack of longevity when pushed under continuous heavy loads. The engine bay was cramped, making even routine service a headache, and parts weren't exactly easy to come by, especially for the more engine-specific components. The transmission, while technically robust, lacked a power shift or synchronized gears, leaving operators wrestling with a stiff, grinding shift pattern that made fieldwork more tedious than it needed to be. Steering response was sluggish, the brakes were notoriously weak under pressure, and the rear end had a tendency to fail prematurely when paired with larger implements, a flaw that left many operators scrambling for expensive rebuilds. The operator station, although wide and open, was far from comfortable, riddled with excessive vibration, poor heat shielding, and minimal noise control that turned long hours into punishing endurance tests. Visibility was fair, but the clunky dash layout and awkward control placement did little to ease daily operation. While the 1150 had muscle on its side, it lacked the finesse, durability, and efficiency needed to hold its own against competitors like John Deere and Case in the same horsepower class. It's a tractor that looks strong on paper but ends up being a high-maintenance, high-frustration machine once it hits the field. Number 4. The Deutz DX160 was marketed as a high-horsepower, German-engineered powerhouse, but in reality, it delivered a frustrating blend of complexity, inconsistency, and underwhelming field performance that left many operators scratching their heads. With its air-cooled Deutz V6 engine pumping out around 160 horsepower, the DX160 promised durability and simplicity, but the air-cooled design quickly proved to be a liability in hotter, dustier North American climates, where overheating became a common complaint. The engine also produced a loud, high-pitched roar under load that wore down operator patience, especially given the cab's poor sound insulation and rattling panels. The ZF transmission, though technically advanced, was notoriously shifts were stiff, the linkage wore prematurely, and the lack of a proper power shift or smooth range transition made fieldwork clunky and slow. The cab layout, while futuristic-looking for its time, felt more like an engineering experiment than a user-friendly workspace, with oddly placed controls, limited visibility over the nose, and minimal comfort for long days in the seat. The hydraulic system, while capable on paper, was slow to respond and underpowered compared to its competitors, leaving implements sluggish and making loader work inefficient. In maintenance, the DX160 was a mechanics challenge tight engine, access, complex wiring harnesses, and parts that often had to be imported made even basic repairs time-consuming and expensive. Though it aimed to be a bold, modern tractor, the Deutz DX160 ended up being a temperamental, high-maintenance machine that overpromised and underdelivered. It's a reminder that engineering ambition means little without real-world reliability and operator practicality to back it up. Number 3. The Rumbly Oil Pole may be a beloved antique today, but back when it was actually expected to work for a living, it was more a brute force compromise than a shining example of smart engineering. Built around a massive two-cylinder oil engine that ran on kerosene or heavier fuels, the oil pole earned its name for its primitive cooling system, which relied on water evaporating off hot oil. Not exactly the most efficient or reliable setup in changing weather conditions. Starting the engine was a ceremony of frustration, involving a blowtorch, hand cranks, and a healthy dose of luck just to get the thing to fire, often leaving operators sweaty and annoyed before the day even began. Once running, the engine thumped, along with violent, slow pulses that shook the entire machine, creating bone-rattling vibrations that made long days on the steel seat a miserable experience. It was loud, smoke-belching, and mechanically unforgiving, with an exposed drivetrain that required constant greasing and adjustment. Maneuverability was laughable, especially with its long wheelbase and stiff steering, and the tractor was glacially slow, better suited for pulling massive loads in a straight line than doing any kind of nuanced fieldwork. Its sheer size and weight tore up softer fields, and with no live PTO, no hydraulics, and minimal operator protection, it quickly became outdated as more practical, versatile machines hit the market. Though it holds nostalgic charm today, the Rumbly Oil Pole in its working years was less a marvel of innovation and more a test of patience and physical endurance. It may have pulled, but it pulled hard on your time, your body, and your wallet. Number 2. The Deutz D15 might carry the charm of a compact, air-cooled German tractor from the early 1960s, but its real-world performance left a lot to be desired, even in its own era. With a tiny single-cylinder or two-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine pushing out around 15 horsepower, the D15 was barely capable of handling more than the lightest of chores, often laboring under even modest loads like small plows or basic hay equipment. The air-cooled design, while theoretically low maintenance, proved to be loud, vibratory, and prone to overheating in hotter climates or under extended use, especially when dust choked the cooling fins. A common issue in dry field conditions, the transmission was rudimentary, offering limited gear ranges with clunky shifts and no synchronization, meaning every shift was a deliberate, jarring motion that wore on the operator and the machine alike. Ergonomics were almost non-existent. The platform was cramped, the seat was barely padded, and control placement seemed like an afterthought, turning a simple task into an awkward, fatiguing process. There was no live PTO, no power steering, and the hydraulic lift system was basic at best, slow, weak, and imprecise, limiting the D15's ability to effectively use a wide range of implements. Maintenance access wasn't much better, with tight engine compartments and outdated design choices that made even simple service tasks more tedious than necessary. While it may now find a second life in vintage shows or small hobby farms, the Deutz D15 was underpowered, under-equipped, and quickly outclassed by more versatile and operator-friendly models from competitors. In its prime, it was more of a glorified garden tractor than a true farm workhorse for anyone expecting real utility. It delivered more frustration than results. Number 1. The John Deere 2010 stands out in the company's otherwise strong legacy as a rare misstep, a tractor that looked the part but fell flat in almost every critical category. Introduced in the early 1960s as part of Deere's new generation lineup, the 2010 was supposed to be a leap forward, yet it quickly developed a reputation for mechanical fragility and frustrating design flaws. The engine, whether gasoline, diesel, or LP, was underpowered for its size, pushing around 40 horsepower, and suffered from poor durability, with common complaints of blown head gaskets, weak sleeves, and inconsistent oil pressure, particularly in the diesel models. But the real disaster lay in the hydraulic system and the powertrain. The 2010's hydraulic system was complicated and unreliable, prone to internal leaks and pressure loss that made the steering, brakes, and lift systems slow and erratic. The transmission, meanwhile, felt clunky and outdated, and the differential and final drives were known weak spots, often requiring costly overhauls long before they should. Worse yet, parts availability for the 2010 became a nightmare due to its unique and short-lived design. It shared very little with other Deere models, making long-term ownership more of a scavenger hunt than routine maintenance. Ergonomically, it wasn't doing any favors either. The operator station was cramped, the control layout was unintuitive, and the ride was rough, thanks to a stiff chassis and poor vibration isolation. While Deere fans often defend their green machines to the bitter end, even the most loyal will admit that the 2010 was a rushed attempt to modernize that sacrificed reliability and serviceability. Today, it serves less as a symbol of progress and more as a hard-learned lesson in why not all John Deeres are created equal.